The smell of fried chicken, the red and white bucket, the smiling face of Colonel Sanders. For millions of people across the world, KFC is more than just a fast food chain, it's a cultural icon. The brand's carefully crafted image promises comfort, indulgence, and a taste that's finger-licking good. But behind the cheerful advertisements and friendly slogans lies a story the company would rather you never hear, a story of mass suffering, secrecy, and a supply chain soaked in cruelty. Our journey begins not in the bright lights of a KFC storefront, but in the dim, ammonia-filled air of an industrial chicken farm. These facilities, the hidden engines of the fried chicken empire, are where birds are hatched, fattened, and slaughtered by the billions each year. And for the animals trapped inside, the experience is nothing short of a nightmare. To understand how we got here, we have to start with KFC's supply model. Unlike some restaurants, KFC doesn't own the farms that raise its chickens. Instead, it sources meat from a network of suppliers, many of them massive agribusiness operations, whose sole purpose is to produce chickens as cheaply and quickly as possible. This arrangement allows KFC to keep its own hands clean, at least in the public eye, while outsourcing the actual work of raising and killing animals to third parties. In the poultry industry, efficiency is king. Farmers are under constant pressure to produce more meat in less time for less money. This means selecting breeds of chickens that grow unnaturally fast, often reaching slaughter weight in just 6 weeks. Their bodies swell so quickly that their bones can't keep up, leaving many unable to stand or walk properly. They collapse under their own weight, struggling in the filthy litter that lines the barn floors. Undercover investigations by animal welfare groups have captured the grim reality inside these facilities. Barns crammed with tens of thousands of birds, so tightly packed they can barely move. The air is thick with dust and the stench of waste. Many birds suffer from open sores, infections, and severe deformities. Dead chickens lie uncollected among the living, their bodies slowly decomposing. For KFC, these are the invisible costs of keeping its menu cheap and its profits high. The company's advertising paints an image of happy, healthy chickens, often implying that its meat is responsibly sourced. But activists and former employees tell a different story, one of rampant animal abuse, minimal oversight, and a corporate culture more concerned with public relations than with actual animal welfare. Over the years, exposés have linked KFC's suppliers to repeated instances of cruelty. In one investigation in the United States, workers were caught on camera kicking live birds, stomping on their heads, and throwing them against walls. In the UK, a major supplier was found to keep thousands of chickens in overcrowded barns with no natural light, many suffering from untreated injuries. KFC's response to these revelations has often been carefully worded statements, pledging to review the situation or work with suppliers to ensure best practices. But behind the corporate jargon, little seems to change. In fact, many of the worst practices in the poultry industry are perfectly legal and even standard under current agricultural regulations. Part of the reason the abuse continues is that the entire system is designed to prioritize production over welfare. The birds are treated not as living creatures, but as units of meat, their lives reduced to a series of calculations: feed conversion rates, growth speed, slaughter yield. From the moment they hatch, every decision about their existence is shaped by the goal of maximizing profit. The result is a staggering moral blind spot. Consumers see only the final product, the crispy golden chicken on their plate, without realizing the suffering that went into producing it. KFC and its suppliers benefit from this ignorance, relying on a marketing machine that distracts from the ugly truth. But cracks are beginning to form in the carefully maintained facade. As more whistleblowers come forward and investigative footage circulates online, the public is starting to question what's really in that bucket. Activists are demanding not just better treatment for the animals, but also greater transparency from companies like KFC. This documentary will take you inside the world. KFC doesn't want you to see from the farms, where chicks take their first painful steps, to the slaughterhouses, where their lives are cut short, to the boardrooms, where executives decide how much suffering is an acceptable price for profit. The road ahead will lead us deeper into the heart of the supply chain, to meet the people who work within it, the campaigners fighting to change it, and the communities living in its shadow. And along the way, we will confront a simple but uncomfortable question. How much cruelty are we willing to accept for the sake of convenience and taste? Because once you see behind the bucket, you can never look at it the same way again. The farm is hidden behind high chain-link fencing and no trespassing signs. From the road, you can just make out the long windowless sheds, each one capable of holding more than 30,000 birds. There are no cheerful clucks here, no sprawling green fields like the ones shown in KFC's advertisements. Instead, the reality is industrial silent, except for the low mechanical hum of the ventilation fans, pushing stale air out into the open. Inside, the light is dim, filtered through dust-filled air. The floor is a living carpet of chickens, white feathers turned yellowish from the ammonia in their bedding. They have been bred for one purpose, only to grow fast, to get fat, to become meat as quickly as possible. But that speed comes at a cost. Many birds' legs bow outward unnaturally, their bodies too heavy for their skeletal structure. Others sit motionless in the litter, their wings spread awkwardly, unable to stand at all. Former workers describe the smell as something you never forget. It gets in your skin, says Luis, a man who worked for 2 years in one of KFC's supplier barns in the American South. It's the mix of ammonia, feces, and death. You go home, and no matter how much you shower, it's still on you. Luis recalls how the company he worked for, a contracted supplier to KFC, prioritized output above everything else. Our job wasn't to take care of the birds. It was to make sure they reached slaughter weight on time. If one got sick, we didn't treat it. We just left it there to die. That lack of care isn't unusual. The poultry industry runs on thin margins, and treating individual animals for illness is seen as an unnecessary expense. With tens of thousands of birds in a single shed, a few dead chickens here and there are just part of the calculation. Workers are instructed to remove the carcasses during daily walkthroughs, but former employees say that sometimes the bodies are simply left to rot because staff are understaffed or overwhelmed. Animal welfare investigators have documented the same pattern across multiple countries. In the UK, an undercover team filmed at a supplier where birds with broken legs dragged themselves across the floor, desperate to reach food and water. In Thailand, one of KFC's major export markets workers were filmed tossing live chicks into bins because they were deemed too small to be profitable. The slaughter process itself is equally grim. Once the birds reach the required weight, they are crammed into transport crates, often in sweltering heat, and trucked to slaughterhouses. Many suffer broken wings or legs during loading. Some die from stress or heat exhaustion before even reaching the plant. At the processing facility, the standard method is live shackling. Chickens are hung upside down by their legs on a conveyor belt. They pass through an electrified water bath meant to stun them before their throats are cut by a mechanical blade. But the system isn't perfect. Some birds are improperly stunned and remain conscious as they are killed. Investigations have found instances where chickens are still alive as they enter the scalding tanks used to loosen feathers. For the workers on the kill line, the pace is relentless. You don't think about the fact that these are living beings, says Maria, a former slaughterhouse employee in North Carolina. You can't. If you do, you won't last a day. You just focus on keeping up with the speed, or you'll get fired. The speed is no accident. KFC and other major buyers demand high-volume, low-cost meat. This pressure travels down the supply chain, forcing farms and processing plants to cut corners wherever they can. For the animals, that means more suffering. For the workers, it means long hours in dangerous conditions, often for low pay. In public, KFC claims to enforce strict animal welfare standards for its suppliers. But the reality, according to whistleblowers, is that inspections are often announced in advance, giving farms time to clean up before auditors arrive. In some cases, contractors say they were told to hide sick or injured birds during visits. Animal rights organizations have tried to hold KFC accountable through public campaigns. Groups like Mercy for Animals and PETA have staged protests outside KFC locations, released graphic undercover videos, and launched petitions demanding the company adopt the Better Chicken Commitment, a set of standards aimed at reducing suffering in the poultry industry. While some of KFC's regional branches, like in the UK, have made partial pledges, the company's global operations remain far behind the curve. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, KFC's sales continue to grow. The company opens hundreds of new stores every year, especially in markets across Asia and Africa. The demand for cheap chicken is relentless, and for most customers, the reality of where it comes from remains invisible. But in this darkness, there are cracks of light, the growing number of insiders willing to speak out. From farmers who've walked away from contracts, to workers who've risked retaliation to share what they've seen, their voices are slowly piercing the silence. The whistleblower called himself Daniel, though that wasn't his real name. He was a contract worker for one of KFC's largest poultry suppliers in the southeastern United States. His job was routine walking the barns, checking feed levels, removing dead birds, but over time the routine became unbearable. Daniel says it began with small moments that stuck in his mind. A chick with a broken leg left gasping for air, a worker joking as he kicked a chicken across the floor, the overpowering stench of decay on hot days when the ventilation failed. For months, he kept silent, convincing himself that speaking up would change nothing. But then one day, he found himself standing in a corner of the barn, watching a worker stomp on a live bird's neck to kill it, because it was too small to bother with. That was the moment, he says, when he realized he couldn't keep quiet. Daniel reached out to an animal welfare organization known for undercover investigations. They provided him with a small, button-sized camera and training on how to use it without being detected. For 6 weeks, he recorded every shift, the feeding, the handling, the slaughter prep, capturing the grim reality that KFC customers never see. The footage he brought back was horrifying. Birds with open wounds left untreated, maggots crawling over carcasses, workers hurling live chickens into piles like sacks of garbage. In one clip, a bird with a prolapsed vent, a painful condition caused by rapid growth, was still alive, barely able to move, ignored by workers as they stepped over it. In another, chickens gasped for air in the sweltering heat, panting and collapsing from exhaustion. When the footage was released to the public, it went viral. Major news outlets around the world picked up the story. The images were impossible to forget: close-ups of frightened eyes, the sound of frantic flapping as birds were grabbed by their wings, the casual cruelty of workers who saw them as nothing more than production units. KFC's corporate office responded with a statement, expressing shock at the footage, promising a full investigation and immediate action against the supplier. Within days, the company announced it had suspended its contract with that particular farm. But animal rights groups pointed out the obvious: this wasn't a single bad apple. The conditions Daniel documented were consistent with systemic issues in the industrial poultry industry. The public reaction was divided. Some vowed never to eat at KFC again, sharing the footage on social media, with hashtags calling for a boycott. Others shrugged it off, arguing that this is just how farming works. But for those who had never seen the inside of a chicken farm before, the images planted seeds of doubt that couldn't be ignored. Behind the scenes, Daniel's life became complicated. His identity was protected, but rumors circulated among workers that someone had been filming. Friends stopped talking to him, afraid of being implicated. Eventually, he left the job entirely, saying the mental toll was too heavy. "I still hear the sounds," he told reporters later. "The screaming. Chickens scream, you know. Not like in cartoons, it's different. It's more like panic." The organization that had supported Daniel's investigation used the footage to launch an international campaign targeting KFC. Billboards went up in major cities, with stark images of chickens crammed together under the slogan, "This is the real secret recipe." Outside KFC branches, activists staged protests, handing out leaflets and showing the footage on large screens to passers-by. KFC's brand took a hit in certain markets, but the company's global sales machine barely slowed. In places where the footage was heavily reported, the UK-Canada parts of the US public pressure led to promises of better welfare audits. But in many other regions, the story barely made the news. And yet, within the company, there was quiet concern. Former executives have since revealed that incidents like Daniel's footage are seen as PR landmines, threats that must be contained quickly before they damage the brand's image. Rather than fundamentally changing supply chain practices, the priority is often to control the narrative, replace the supplier, issue a statement, move on. The footage had shone a rare light into the shadows of the supply chain. But for every farm caught on camera, hundreds more continue operating in secrecy, hidden from the public eye. When you order a bucket of KFC in London, Sydney or Manila, it feels like the chicken inside it must have come from somewhere nearby, a local farm, perhaps just a few hours away. That's part of the illusion. In reality, KFC operates one of the most complex and far-reaching poultry supply networks in the world, stretching across continents and time zones, where distance paperwork and layers of subcontractors blur the origins of every piece of meat that ends up in your meal. KFC, owned by Yum Brands, does not farm or slaughter chickens itself. Instead, it relies on a sprawling network of suppliers, industrial-scale chicken companies like Tyson Foods in the United States, Tegel in New Zealand, Cargill in Thailand, and various other regional giants. These suppliers then work with contract farmers, thousands of them, who raise the birds according to guidelines set by the corporations, which are in turn shaped by KFC's own volume and cost demands. At first glance, the chain seems straightforward: hatchery, grow-out farm, processing plant, distribution center, KFC restaurant. But the reality is far murkier. A single chicken may start its life in a hatchery owned by one company, be raised by a farmer contracted to another, and be slaughtered and processed in a facility shared by multiple brands. This fragmentation makes it almost impossible for consumers to trace their meal back to a specific farm, and that's exactly how the system is designed. This decentralization has a consequence: accountability evaporates. When abuse is uncovered, KFC can claim it does not own or directly control the farms, distancing itself from wrongdoing. The suppliers, in turn, can blame individual contract farmers. Farmers can blame the company's strict growth requirements, citing industry norms as justification. The cruelty becomes everyone's problem and no one's responsibility. And the scope is staggering. KFC's suppliers process billions of chickens every year. In the United States alone, the poultry industry kills roughly 9 billion birds annually, with a significant percentage going to KFC and other fast food chains. In Asia, demand is rising even faster. KFC's expansion in China, where it's the largest fast food brand, requires a constant massive supply of meat. That supply often comes from vertically integrated giants like the China division of Tyson or CP Foods in Thailand, where chickens are raised in conditions similar to those in the West, overcrowded underlit barns designed for maximum growth speed. Conditions vary slightly from region to region, but the core model remains the same. In Brazil, chickens destined for KFC are raised in enormous sheds across the states of Paraná and Santa Catarina, where temperatures and light cycles are carefully controlled to force rapid weight gain. In the UK, suppliers like Moy Park and Two Sisters Food Group have been repeatedly linked to investigations exposing overcrowding ammonia burns and the mass culling of sick birds. One reason the system persists is cost. KFC's business model depends on selling chicken cheaply while still turning a profit. That means squeezing the supply chain, paying less per bird, increasing production speed, and keeping losses dead or unmarketable birds as low as possible. Suppliers pass that pressure down to farmers, who often operate on thin margins and take on huge debt to maintain their contracts. This is where animal welfare takes the biggest hit. To meet growth targets, suppliers use breeds genetically selected for rapid weight gain. These birds often suffer from heart problems and skeletal deformities before they are even fully grown. Their lives are short, just 35 to 49 days, from hatch to slaughter, but filled with chronic pain. From an industry perspective, their suffering isn't a flaw in the system. It's part of the system's design. Adding to the opacity is the fact that most farms are located far from major cities, tucked away in rural areas, where journalists and activists have little access. Biosecurity laws intended to prevent disease outbreaks are often used to bar outsiders from entering, even with permission from farm workers. This means the public rarely sees these facilities, except when whistleblowers smuggle in cameras or drone operators capture aerial footage. Even when abuse makes headlines, KFC has the ability to sidestep responsibility by pointing to local differences in supply chains. If a scandal emerges in the UK, executives can insist that the practices don't reflect operations in Asia. If footage from the US shocks the public, they can highlight higher welfare standards in Europe. But behind these talking points, the fundamentals remain unchanged. The relentless drive for cheap chicken pushes every supplier in every country toward the same corner-cutting practices. KFC occasionally issues animal welfare reports highlighting small victories, a supplier transitioning to controlled atmosphere stunning, rather than live shackling, or farms providing perches and pecking objects to enrich the bird's environment. These measures are trumpeted in press releases, but they affect only a fraction of the company's global supply. The vast majority of KFC chickens still live and die in conditions far removed from the idyllic farms shown in marketing materials. And for the birds themselves, the geography is irrelevant. Whether in Arkansas, Bangkok, or São Paulo, the experience is the same: confinement, rapid growth disease, rough handling, and slaughter. The pain is universal. Behind the golden glow of KFC's marketing lies a workforce that is rarely acknowledged, the people whose labor keeps the supply chain moving, whose lives are often marked by injury, poverty, and fear. While the birds endure short, brutal lives, the humans who raise, handle, and slaughter them often live in conditions that mirror the neglect shown to the animals. Let's start with the contract farmers. In the United States, the majority of chickens raised for KFC come from contract growers working under large poultry corporations. These farmers don't own the birds, they are supplied by the company. The corporation delivers chicks feed and strict instructions for raising them, and then collects the grown birds for processing. On paper, it's a partnership. In reality, it's a system of economic control. Farmers invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, often in loans, to build and maintain the industrial barns required by the companies. Any deviation from company standards can lead to financial penalties or termination of the contract, which can ruin a farmer overnight. You either play by their rules, or you lose everything, says Rick, a former grower in Arkansas. It's not farming, it's indentured servitude. And the rules push farmers into ethically grey territory. To meet weight targets, they must raise breeds that grow so fast their bodies can barely support themselves. If a bird collapses from heart failure or can't reach the feeder, it's written off as loss. With thousands of birds in each barn, individual care is impossible. Then there are the slaughterhouse workers, the people who process the chickens once they leave the farms. The work is grueling and dangerous. Lines move at blinding speeds, with workers often making the same motion thousands of times per shift. This repetitive motion, combined with slippery floors and heavy machinery, leads to high rates of injury, carpal tunnel syndrome, tendinitis, lacerations, even amputations. Many of these workers are immigrants, refugees, or people with few other job options. Language barriers, fear of retaliation, and lack of union representation leave them vulnerable to exploitation. In some plants, bathroom breaks are discouraged or denied, forcing workers to wear pads or urinate on themselves to keep up with the pace. Maria, a former employee at a poultry plant supplying multiple fast food chains, including KFC, describes it bluntly. It's the smell of death all day, the blood, the noise, the feathers sticking to your skin. You dream about it at night and wake up with your hands still aching. She worked there for 7 years before her back gave out and she was let go without severance. The pressure is relentless because every minute matters. A delay on the kill line can throw off the entire production schedule, costing money that companies refuse to lose. Supervisors are trained to keep the line moving no matter what. Injured workers are sometimes told to shake it off or sent back to the line after a cursory visit to the on-site nurse. Outside the processing plants, transport workers face their own challenges. They haul crates of live birds, sometimes in sweltering heat, sometimes in freezing cold, to slaughterhouses. These trucks are often open-sided, meaning birds are exposed to the elements for hours. The stress of transport kills thousands of chickens before they even arrive at their destination, but drivers are under strict schedules and rarely have the option to stop. In poorer countries where KFC is rapidly expanding, the situation can be even worse. Labor protections are weaker, wages are lower, and safety equipment is minimal. Investigations in parts of Asia and Africa have found workers handling live birds and sharp tools without gloves, masks, or protective clothing. In some regions, children have been spotted working in poultry facilities, cleaning floors slick with blood and feathers. For both animals and humans, the system rewards speed and volume over care or dignity, and it's all hidden from the customer's view. When you walk into a KFC, you see smiling employees at the counter and glossy posters of fried chicken buckets, not the bent backs, bleeding hands, or sleepless nights of those who keep the machine running. KFC's corporate policies make occasional references to worker safety, but enforcement is left to the suppliers, who have a vested interest in keeping costs down. And just as with animal welfare audits, labour inspections are often announced in advance, or conducted by third parties, paid by the companies themselves. The result is predictable reports that everything is fine, while behind the walls little changes. The connection between animal suffering and human suffering is no coincidence. They are two sides of the same coin, a production system designed to squeeze every ounce of profit from living beings, whether feathered or flesh and blood. The cruelty toward the animals is mirrored in the exploitation of the people who handle them. If you want to understand why animal abuse and worker exploitation persist in KFC's supply chain, you need to look beyond the barns, beyond the slaughterhouses, and into the corporate boardrooms. Because while the cruelty happens out of sight, it is not accidental. It is a direct outcome of a business model engineered to maximize profit at every link in the chain. KFC is owned by Yum Brands, a global fast food giant that also controls Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. In 2023 alone, Yum reported over $7 billion in revenue, with KFC contributing a significant share. The company's growth strategy relies on three pillars: expand rapidly into emerging markets, maintain low menu prices to appeal to the mass market, and protect profit margins through ruthless cost control. In practice, this means KFC demands an endless stream of cheap chicken. The corporation negotiates massive contracts with poultry giants, leveraging its size to secure the lowest possible price per pound. Those poultry companies, in turn, pass the pressure down to contract farmers, slaughterhouse workers, and transport crews. Every cent squeezed from production becomes a cent added to Yum's profits, and every extra cent means investors are happy. The quarterly earnings call is the true driver of this system. Wall Street rewards consistent growth, and for a company like Yum, growth often comes not from selling more expensive products, but from selling more volume. To sell more, you have to keep prices attractive. To keep prices attractive, you have to keep costs down. And to keep costs down, you cut corners, whether that means cramming more chickens into barns, increasing slaughter line speeds, or paying workers just enough to survive. Behind the scenes, KFC's corporate culture prizes efficiency. Executives talk about supply chain optimization, lean operations, and maximizing yield. These phrases sound harmless in business reports, but on the ground, they translate to birds growing so fast their hearts give out, or workers rushing through hundreds of kills per hour. KFC has a public-facing animal welfare policy, which promises that suppliers must follow humane treatment guidelines. On paper, this is a shield against criticism. In reality, enforcement is minimal. Internal audits are often performed by third-party firms paid by the suppliers themselves, a glaring conflict of interest. When violations are found, they're handled quietly, with suppliers given time to correct them before contracts are threatened. And then there's lobbying. Yum Brands spends millions each year to influence policy in ways that protect its business model. In the United States, the company and its industry partners have lobbied against stronger animal welfare regulations, especially those that would slow production or increase costs. In some cases, they've opposed measures to require clearer labeling about farming practices, knowing that transparency could push consumers away from factory-farmed chicken. The same playbook applies internationally. In countries where animal welfare laws are weak, KFC exploits the regulatory gap to operate at even lower costs. In markets like China, the Philippines, and South Africa, suppliers are rarely subjected to independent welfare inspections, and working conditions for laborers can be worse than in the West. Corporate PR departments work hard to counter any negative press. When an undercover video emerges, the company issues carefully crafted statements emphasizing its commitment to continuous improvement and zero tolerance for abuse. These statements are often paired with pledges to review supply chain practices, a phrase that buys time until public outrage dies down. By the time attention shifts to the next scandal, KFC has quietly resumed business as usual. This damage control strategy works because the majority of customers don't follow up after the headlines fade. People may share a viral video or sign an online petition, but without sustained pressure, the economic incentives that drive abuse remain untouched. And KFC knows this. Executives count on short attention spans and the public's craving for convenience. Meanwhile, shareholder reports paint a rosy picture. KFC continues to grow globally, with hundreds of new outlets opening each year. Dividend payouts increase, stock prices rise, and the cycle continues. In the logic of corporate capitalism, as long as the system delivers profits, there is no reason to dismantle it no matter the cost to animals, people, or the environment. But there's one factor: KFC's strategists can't fully control the growing wave of consumer awareness. Every undercover investigation, every leaked document, every whistleblower's testimony chips away at the carefully maintained image of finger-licking good. And when enough people connect the dots between their dinner and the suffering behind it, even a giant like Yum Brands can be forced to change. For decades, KFC's supply chain operated in relative obscurity. Customers saw only the red and white buckets, the smiling Colonel Sanders logo, and the promise of crispy, flavorful chicken. But as investigative journalism, hidden cameras, and grassroots activism have spread across the internet, the veil has begun to lift. And what has been revealed is ugly enough to spark outrage around the world. The earliest waves of public pushback came from animal rights organizations like PETA Compassion in World Farming and the Humane Society of the United States. In the early 2000s, these groups began targeting KFC, directly staging protests outside restaurants, launching billboard campaigns, and releasing graphic footage from supplier farms. Some of these images, birds with open wounds dying in overcrowded barns, went viral before viral was even a marketing term. In 2003, PETA launched a campaign called Kentucky Fried Cruelty, explicitly naming KFC as the face of industrial chicken abuse. Their goal wasn't just to shame the brand, but to push it toward adopting higher welfare standards, such as slower growing breeds, more space per bird, and less painful slaughter methods. KFC responded with public statements emphasizing its animal welfare audits, but activists argued these were little more than PR stunts. Over time, the activism diversified. Groups like Mercy for Animals and Animal Equality began conducting their own undercover investigations, often using former industry workers to gain access to farms and slaughterhouses. The footage they captured, sometimes from facilities supplying KFC, directly showed scenes of workers kicking, throwing and stomping birds, or tossing live chicks into trash bins. These videos reached millions on social media, sparking outrage far beyond the traditional animal rights movement. But activism didn't stop at the farm gate. Labor rights organizations began drawing connections between animal cruelty and worker exploitation, noting how both were symptoms of the same profit-driven system. Groups like the Food Chain Workers Alliance and Oxfam America highlighted the dangerous conditions in poultry plants, linking them to fast food demand. In some cases, KFC restaurants became protest sites for both animal advocates and labor unions, with demonstrators standing shoulder to shoulder. Legal pressure also began to mount. While no single lawsuit has yet forced KFC to overhaul its supply chain, several cases have chipped away at its image. In the UK, investigative journalism and whistleblower testimonies led to government scrutiny of major suppliers like Two Sisters Food Group, which counted KFC among its clients. In the US, while KFC itself has often avoided direct legal liability, some of its suppliers have faced lawsuits over animal welfare violations, environmental damage, or labor abuses. Each time the brand's name appeared in headlines alongside the word abuse. Internationally, the movement gained traction through coalitions like the Better Chicken Commitment, which pushes companies to adopt welfare reforms such as more space per bird, better lighting and natural enrichments in barns. Dozens of major brands have signed on, but KFC's adoption has been inconsistent, varying by region. In the UK and parts of Europe, the company pledged to meet the standards by 2026. In the US and Asia, the same promises remain absent. For activists, this is a sign that public pressure works, but only where it's strongest. Countries with more vocal consumer movements and stronger media coverage tend to see more corporate concessions. Elsewhere, KFC continues to operate under its old model. This has led to coordinated global campaigns where activists in multiple countries stage protests, flood KFC's social media with demands and pressure celebrities or influencers to drop endorsements. Some of the most impactful moments have come from unexpected places. In 2018, a series of Facebook posts from a contract farmer in Arkansas, complete with photos of sick, deformed birds, went viral, reaching millions without the involvement of any formal organization. KFC was forced to issue a statement, and while it denied wrongdoing, the incident kept the issue alive in the news cycle for weeks. Despite all this, change has been slow. Corporate inertia, combined with the sheer profitability of the current system, means KFC has little incentive to make sweeping reforms unless public outrage threatens the bottom line. But activists are playing the long game. They know that brand image is one of KFC's most valuable assets, and that every time the words animal abuse trend alongside KFC, the Colonel's smile looks a little less friendly. The question now is whether this growing awareness can translate into lasting change. As history shows, corporations rarely move out of moral obligation alone. It often takes a combination of legal force, market pressure, and sustained public activism to shift the status quo. And that's where the final part of this investigation turns to the future. Can KFC's global empire of chicken be transformed, or is the system too entrenched to dismantle? The story of KFC's chicken supply chain is one of hidden suffering, carefully engineered invisibility, and a profit system that feeds off both animals and humans. But it's also a story that isn't finished yet, and whether its ending is one of reform or repetition will depend on decisions made by corporations, governments, and everyday consumers. In theory, transforming the system is possible. The tools exist. Welfare reforms like those in the Better Chicken Commitment could dramatically reduce animal suffering. Slower growing breeds that don't collapse under their own weight, more space per bird, enriched barns with natural light and perches, and a shift to more humane slaughter methods like controlled atmosphere stunning. For workers, change could mean safer line speeds, guaranteed bathroom breaks, fair wages, and real enforcement of labor laws. None of this is science fiction. It's already happening in isolated pockets of the industry. But reform on a global scale requires something far more difficult: a willingness to prioritize ethics over maximum profit. That's where the problem lies. For KFC, like most corporations, shareholder value is the ultimate measure of success. If reforms cost money, and they do, the only way they happen is if the financial or reputational cost of not changing becomes greater. That's where pressure from activism, media, and consumer choice comes in. The first possible future is one of incremental change. In regions with strong activist movements and higher consumer expectations, KFC adopts improved welfare and labor standards. Marketing campaigns highlight these ethical upgrades as a way to win back public trust. In countries with less scrutiny, the old practices continue a split model where reform is more about public image than moral responsibility. This scenario would mean progress, but it would also mean continued suffering in the shadows. The second possible future is systemic transformation. This would involve KFC committing globally to higher standards, working with suppliers to raise welfare and labor protections everywhere, not just where they're under pressure. It would also mean transparency, regular independent audits, with results published for the public to see. In this scenario, KFC could become a leader in ethical fast food, setting a precedent for the entire industry. It's not impossible. We've seen similar shifts in other sectors when public and investor demand aligns. But it would require KFC's leadership to view ethics as a long-term investment rather than a short-term liability. The third possible future is business as usual. In this world, KFC makes just enough changes to deflect criticism while keeping the underlying system intact. This is the path of least resistance, and the one history tells us is most likely if public outrage dies down. Under this model, the abuse and exploitation we've documented remain embedded in the supply chain, and each new scandal is handled with temporary PR fixes until the next one comes along. There's also an emerging wild card: the rise of alternative proteins. Plant-based chicken products, lab-grown meat, and hybrid alternatives are gaining traction. Some fast food chains are already testing them, and consumer interest is growing, especially among younger generations. If these products become cost-competitive, they could disrupt the entire poultry industry. KFC has dabbled in plant-based menu items in some markets, but adoption has been cautious. A bold move here could allow the brand to maintain its market while sidestepping the ethical minefield of factory farming. Ultimately, though, the greatest power lies with the public. Every dollar spent is a vote for the system that produced the food. If enough consumers refuse to buy from supply chains built on cruelty, corporations are forced to adapt. The challenge is keeping awareness alive, not letting the images of suffering fade once they leave the trending page. KFC is not a villain in a vacuum. It's part of a global network of corporations, built on the same industrial model from McDonald's to Burger King, to countless smaller chains. The choice before us is whether we continue to accept that cheap fast food must come at the cost of massive suffering, or whether we demand something better. The truth is simple, if uncomfortable. The buckets of fried chicken on our tables are not just the product of herbs and spices, but of blood and bone, of broken wings and broken backs, of human exhaustion and animal agony. This system exists because it is profitable, and it will end only when it becomes unprofitable to maintain. The question is not whether KFC can change. The question is whether we as consumers, citizens, and human beings will force it to. Because in the end, the real secret ingredient in KFC's recipe isn't hidden in the spice blend. It's hidden in plain sight in the lives of those who pay the price for every piece of chicken sold. And until that truth changes, the cycle will continue.